Good day everyone. We are the group 2 and we will discuss about the chapter 2, Science, Matter and Energy. I am Chapter2Acorda and I will discuss what scientists do. Scientists collect data and develop theories, models and laws about how nature works. Science is a search for order in nature. Science is an attempt to discover how nature works and to use that knowledge to make predictions about what is likely to happen in nature. It is based on the assumption that events in natural world follow a cause and effect pattern in orderly ways that can be understood through careful observation, measurements, experimentation, and modeling. Science is a research. So, mabantayan sa nato no nga kanang mga bata bitaw ages 4 to 5 kanang as in bata pa jud is daghang pangutana about og unsa na din ingana ang kanang sa science we kanang mag-search ta para makahibaw sa solution sa problems nga nakita nato or we search to look for the problems. How do scientists learn about nature? So I will read to you a core case study. It is a story about a forest. So listen very well, guys. You learned that a logging company plans to cut down all of the trees on a hillside in back of your house. You are very concerned and want to know the possible harmful environmental effects of this action on the hillside, the stream at the bottom of the hillside, and your backyard. So kahibaw naman tanong sa buhaton sa mga logging companies, mamuto o mga kahoy. One way to learn about such effects is to conduct a controlled experiment, just as environmental scientists do. They begin by identifying key variables such as water loss and soil nutrient content that might change when the trees are cut down. Then, they set up two groups. One is the experimental group, in which a chosen variable is changed in a known way. The other is the control group, in which the chosen variable is not changed. Their goal is to compare the two groups after the variable has been changed and to look for differences resulting from the change. In 1963, botanist F. Herbert Borman, forest ecologist Jean Likens, and their colleagues began carrying out such a controlled experiment. The goal was to compare the loss of water and soil nutrients from an area of uncut forest, which is the control site, with the one that was stripped off of its trees, the experimental site. And makita ra nato ni siya nga kanang figure, ang photo sa experimental site o control site kanang sa next nga slide. So, they built V-shaped concrete dams across the creeks at the bottom of several forested valleys in the Hobart Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire. The dams were designed so that all surface water leaving each forested valley had to flow across a dam, where scientists could measure its volume and dissolve nutrient content. So this is the figure 2. The controlled field experiment to measure the effects of deforestation and the loss of water and soil nutrients from a forest. V-notch dams were built at the bottoms of two forested valleys so that all water and nutrients flowing from each valley could be collected and measured for volume and mineral content. These measurements were recorded for the forested valley, which is the picture on the left, which acted as the control site. So, mo na ang akong giingon. Then, all the trees in the other valley, the experimental site, which is the picture in the right, were cut and the flows of water and soil nutrients from this experimental were measured for 3 years. So ingani ang gibuhat sa mga scientists para makahibaw sila unsa mahitabo sa nature kung pangputlon ang mga kahoy. First, the researchers measured the amounts of water and dissolved soil nutrients flowing from an undisturbed forested area in one of the valleys. Ato nga katong control site, which is sa left nga picture. These measurements showed that an undisturbed mature forest is very efficient at storing water and retaining chemical nutrients in its soils. So if daghan ang kahoy ani nga kanang lugar, so mas gamay ang kanang percentage of kanang floods and ang pagka bitaw kanang landslides. Then next, they set up an experimental forest area in another of the valleys. One winter, they cut down all the trees and shrubs in the valley. Katong experimental side nga nasa right bitaw katong right side sa katong image. Left them where they fell and sprayed the area with herbicides to prevent the regrowth of vegetation. Then they compared outflow of water and nutrients in this experimental site with those in the control site. So ilang gi-compare ang duha kung unsay mahitabo sa katong duha ka forest nga napay kahoy o katong wala na kahoy for 3 years gihapon para mahibuan nila nga ang sulod sa 3 years nga same ra ang climate o ang weather nga ma-experience sa duha ka valley o unsang kanang difference bitaw kay ang isa na pa may mga kahoy, ang isa is wala na. With no plants to help absorb and retain water, the amount of water flowing out of the deforested valley increased by 30 to 40%. Imagine, tako kaayo nagbaha na good. Then as this excess water ran rapidly over the ground, it eroded soil and carried dissolved nutrients out of the deforested site. Overall, the loss of key nutrients from the experimental forest was 6 to 8 times that in the nearby and cat control forest. So dako ra ang kalahian sa naapay mga kahoy o wala na. Kay ang kung daghan ang kahoy, daghan pod ang mupugong sa tubig kung kusog ang uwan. So hinay ra ang kanang medyo hinay ra ang baha. Pero if wala na kanang wala na mo pugong sa kanang tubig kung mag-uwan, so baha na gyud siya, then maanod pod ang mga yuta kay wala po ni pugong sa mga yuta. This controlled experiment revealed one of the ways in which scientists can learn about the effects of our actions on natural systems such as forests. So kani nga controlled experiment lang napakita isa ka paagi nga maguba ang kalibutan pinaagi sa kanang human nga kanang needs bitaw kay kinsa man mo puto sa mga kahoy mga tao man. In this chapter, you will learn more about how scientists study nature and about the matter and energy that make up the world within and around us. You will also learn about 3 scientific laws or the rules of nature that govern the changes that matter and energy undergo. Here is an example of applying the scientific process to an everyday situation. Ang observation is you try to switch on your flashlight and nothing happens. So, ang pangutana, why didn't the light come on? So, nganong wala ni siga ang flashlight. So, ang imong hypothesis is basin kanang di na mo gana ang battery kanang naponder na. Then gitest ang hypothesis through an experiment. So nagbutang og bagong battery, then gi-switch on og balik ang flashlight. Then ang resulta is ang flashlight wala gihapon ni siga. If this is the case, we need to find a new hypothesis and test it. Then the new hypothesis made is maybe the bulb is burned out. So the experiment made is to replace bulb with a new bulb. Then the result is flashlight works then when switched on. So the conclusion is the second hypothesis is verified. Sakto na ang second hypothesis, then ang first hypothesis is katong rejected kay dili man tumao ang problem. Scientists use observations, experiments, and models to answer questions about how nature works. So here is a formal outline of steps scientists often take in trying to understand about nature. This is based on the scientific experiment carried out by Borman and Likens. the core study that I read to you, the story of a forest. First is identify the problem. So the problem identified in the story of the forest is the loss of water and soil nutrients from cut over forest as a problem worth studying. So next is find out what is known about the problem. So Berman and Lycan searched the scientific literature to find out what scientists knew about retention and loss of water and soil nutrients in forests. Next is ask a question to be investigated. So the question to be investigated in the core case study is how does clearing forested land affect its ability to store water and retain soil nutrients? The next is collect data to answer the question. To collect data, which is the information needed to answer their questions, scientists make observations and measurements. Borman and Likens collected and analyzed data on the water and soil nutrients flowing from a patch of an undisturbed forest, which is ang picture sa left side ganina sa figure 2, and from a nearby patch of forest where they had cleared the trees for their experiment katong sa right side niya picture sa figure ganina. The next is propose hypothesis to explain the data. Scientists suggest a scientific hypothesis, a possible and testable explanation of what they observe in nature or in the results of their experiments. The data collected by Borman and Lycan showed that clearing a forest decreases its ability to store water and retain soil nutrients such as nitrogen. They came up with the following hypothesis to explain their data. When a forest is cleared of its vegetation and exposed to rain and melting snow, it retains less water than it did before it was cleared and loses large quantities of its soil nutrients. Next is make testable projections. Scientists make projections about what should happen if an hypothesis is valid and then run an experiment to test the projections. Borman and Likens predicted that if their hypothesis was valid for nitrogen, then a cleared forest should also lose other soil nutrients such as phosphorus over a similar time period and under similar weather conditions. Next is test the projections with further experiments, models, or observations. To test their projection, Borman and Likens repeated their controlled experiment and measured the phosphorus content of the soil. Another way to test projections is to develop a model, an appropriate representation or simulation of a system being studied. Data from the research carried out by Borman and Likens and from other scientists' research can be fed into such models and used to project the loss of phosphorus and other types of soil nutrients. These projections can be compared with the actual measured losses to test the validity of the models. So last is to accept or reject the hypothesis. If their new data do not support their hypothesis, scientists come up with other testable explanations. This process of proposing and testing various hypotheses goes on until there is general agreement among the scientists in the field being studied that a particular hypothesis is the best explanation of the data. After Borman and Likens confirmed that the soil in a cleared forest also loses phosphorus, they measured losses of other soil nutrients, which also supported their hypothesis. Research and models done by other researchers also supported the hypothesis. A well tested and widely accepted scientific hypothesis, or a group of related hypotheses, is called a scientific theory. Thus, Borman and Likens and other scientists developed a theory that trees and other plants hold soil in place and help it retain water and nutrients needed by the plants for their growth. So, the essence of science in this process for testing ideas about how nature works, scientists do not necessarily follow the order of steps shown here, which is katong mag-identify sa problem hantod sa pag-accept of or reject the hypothesis. For example, sometimes a scientist might start by formulating a hypothesis to answer the initial question and then run experiments to test the hypothesis. Para sa gingon ako ganina nga kanang dili rata mag-search tungod kay gusto nato kanang masulbad ang problema kundili mag-search po ta usahay para pangitaon ang problema. Next is the four important features of the scientific process. First is ang curiosity. Scientists are curious and they delight in uncovering new information and ideas about how nature works. But they tend to be highly skeptical of new data, hypotheses, and models until they can be tested and verified. So that's skepticism. Next is the peer review, in which scientists openly publish details of the methods and models they used, the result of their experiments, and the reasoning behind their hypotheses for other scientists working in the same field for evaluation. Next is the producibility. Scientific theories and laws are the most important and reliable sources of science. So ang theories ug ang laws mao gyud na ang pinaka-importante nga kanang reliable gyud nga results sa kanang science na dili na matarog. So facts and data are essential to science. But the real goal of science is to come up with theories and laws based on facts to explain how the physical world works, as pointed out in the quotation that opens this chapter. If an overwhelming body of observations and measurements supports a scientific hypothesis or a group of related hypotheses, it becomes a scientific theory. Another important and reliable outcome of science is a scientific law, or the law of nature, a well tested and widely accepted description of what we find happening over and over in the same way in nature. An example is the law of gravity, based on countless observations and measurements of objects falling from different heights. According to this law, all objects fall to the Earth's surface at predictable speeds. A scientific law cannot be broken as long as the data used to formulate it are accurate. So, there are three types of results of science. First is ang tentative science. These are the preliminary results that capture news headlines. Are controversial because they have not been widely tested and accepted by peer review. So katong kuan pa ba wala pa kay na kanang wa pa na evaluate sa uban pa gyud nga mga scientists in the same field of study. They are not yet considered reliable. Some of the results of the tentative science or frontier science will be validated and classified as reasonable, and some will be discredited and classified as unreliable. At the frontier stage, it is normal for scientists to disagree about the meaning and accuracy of data and the validity of hypotheses and results. This is how scientific knowledge advances. The next type of result is the reliable science. It consists of data, hypotheses, theories, models, and laws that are widely accepted by all or most of the scientists who are considered experts in the field under study, in what is referred to as scientific consensus. Kanang daghan na ba nga nag-agree? Then the results of reliable science are based on the self-correcting process of testing, open peer review, reproducibility, and debate. New evidence and better hypotheses may discredit or alter accepted views, but unless that happens, those views are considered to be the results of reliable science. This means nga ang reliable science ni agi na sa katong four important features of the scientific process, which is the curiosity, katulad nga kanang curious sila, so gusto nila nga mahibaw-an ni, ma-discover ni, or unsa pa diha. Then ang skepticism, then peer review ni agi nag-evaluation sa mga scientists nga same nila og field of study, and then sa reproducibility and debate kanang nadibatihan na then murag na prove na ba nga sakto to nga hypothesis. Scientific hypotheses and results that are presented as reliable without having undergone the rigor of peer review or that have been discarded as a result of peer review are considered to be unreliable science. Mo niyang ikatulo nga kanang type sa result of science. So there are limitations of science. First, scientists cannot prove or disprove anything absolutely because there is always some degree of uncertainty in scientific measurements, observations, and models. Dili ra diha mag-ingon nga kanang unreliable ni without kanang undergoing the due process. The next is scientists are human and thus are not totally free of bias about their own results and hypotheses. Bisan kita no sa atong kagalingon kanang murag kuan ta ba mabias ta sa atong kagalingon kay murag ingon ta permera ta kanang sakto sa ato nga mga hypothesis not knowing nga kanang kuan di ay naatoy nasayop or naadto tayo sayop. The next limitation is important to environmental science. There is many environmental phenomena involve a huge number of interacting variables and complex interactions. Despite these three limitations, science is the most useful way that we have for learning about how nature works and projecting how it might behave in the future. With this important set of tools, we have made much progress, but we still know too little about how the Earth works, its current state of environmental health, and the environmental impacts of our activities. Thank you all for listening. I'll be giving the screen to the next report.
So good day, I am Angel Blagantol. So I discuss about what is matter and how do physical and chemical changes affect it. So to begin our study of environmental science, we look at matter, the stuff that makes up life and its environment. Matter consists of elements and compounds. So, matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. It can exist in three physical states: solid, liquid, and gas, and two chemical forms: elements and compounds. A chemical element is a fundamental substance that has a unique set of properties and cannot be broken down into simpler substances by chemical means. For example, gold is an element. It cannot be broken down into chemically into any other substance. Next is compounds. The combinations of two or more different elements held together in fixed proportions. For example, water is a compound made of the elements hydrogen and oxygen, which have chemically combined with one another. So, atoms, ions, and molecules are the building blocks of matter. So the most basic building block of matter is an atom, the smallest unit of matter into which an element can be divided and still have its characteristics chemical properties. So the idea that all elements are made of atoms is called the atomic theory. It is the most widely accepted scientific theory in chemistry. So each different type of atom contains a certain number of three different types of subatomic particles. The first is the positively charged protons, next, neutrons, and the electrons. So each element has a unique atomic number, equal to the number of protons in the nucleus of its atoms. So the mass of an atom is described by its mass number, the total number of neutrons and protons in its nucleus. Each atom, a particular element, has the same number of protons in its nucleus. But nuclei of atoms of a particular element can vary in the number of neutrons they contain, and therefore in their mass number. Forms if an element having the same atomic number but different mass numbers are called isotopes of that element. So, next is a second building block of some types of matter is an ion. An atom or groups of atoms with one or more net positive or negative electric charges Like atoms, ions are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. So ions are also important for measuring a substance's acidity in a water solution. So a chemical characteristic that helps determine how substance dissolved in water will interact with and affect its environment. Next is the third building block of matter is a molecule, a combination of two or more atoms in the same or different elements held together by forces called chemical bonds. So, we proceed to the organic compounds are the chemicals of life. So, table, sugar, vitamins, plastics, aspirin, penicillin, and the most of the chemicals in your body are organic compounds, which contain at least two carbon atoms combined with atoms of iron or more other elements. All other compounds are called inorganic compounds. So the millions of non-organic compounds include the following. First, hydrocarbons, compounds of carbon and hydrogen atoms. Next is the chlorinated hydrocarbons, compounds of carbon, hydrogen, and chlorine atoms. The third is simple carbohydrates, certain types of compounds of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Larger and more complex organic compounds, essential to life, are composed of macromolecules. So some of these molecules are called polymers, formed when a number of simple organic molecules are linked together by chemical bonds. Someone like rail cars linked in a front train. So there's the three major types of organic polymers are. The first is complex carbohydrates. Next is the proteins formed by monomers called amino acid. Next is the nucleic acids or DNA and RNA formed by monomers called nucleotides. So next is matter becomes life through genes, chromosomes, and cells. So cells is the smallest and most fundamental structural and functional units of life. All organisms are composed of cells. They are minute compartments covered with a thin membrane, and within them, the processes of life occur. The idea that all living things are composed of cells is called the cell theory, and it is not the most widely accepted scientific theory in biology. So some DNA molecules are certain sequences of nucleotides called genes. Each of these distinct pieces of DNA contains instructions called genetic information for making specific proteins. Each of these coded units of the genetic information concerns a specific trait or characteristics passed on from parents to offspring during reproduction in animal or plant. So thousands of genes, in turn, make up a single chromosome, so a special DNA molecule together with a number of proteins. Some forms of matter are more useful than others. First is matter quality. It's a measure of how useful a given sample of matter is as a resource for humans. It is based on its availability and concentration, or the amount of it that is contained in a given area or volume. Next is the high quality matter. It's a highly concentrated, is typically found near the Earth's surface, and has a great potential for use as a resource. Next is the low quality matter. It's not highly concentrated. It's often located deep underground or disappears in the ocean or atmosphere, and usually has little potential for use as a resource. So, matter undergoes physical, chemical, and nuclear changes. So, when a sample of matter undergoes a physical change, there is no change in its chemical position. A piece of aluminum foil cut into small pieces is still aluminum foil. When a chemical change or chemical reactions takes place, there is a change in chemical position of the substances involved. In addition to physical and chemical changes, matter can undergo three types of nuclear changes or changes in the nuclei of its atoms. First is the radioactive decay, second is the nuclear fission, and the third is nuclear fusion. Radioactive decay occurs when nuclei of unstable isotopes spontaneously emit fast-moving chunks of matter, high energy radiation, or both at a fixed rate. Nuclear fusion occurs when the nuclei of certain isotopes with large mass numbers, example is uranium-235, are split together into lighter nuclei when struck by a neutron and release energy plus 2 or 3 more neutrons. Next is the nuclear fusion. Occurs two isotopes of light elements such as hydrogen are forced together at extremely high temperature until they fuse to form a heavier nucleus and release a tremendous amount of energy. So that's all for my topic. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am the third reporter from this group. I am Angeli J. Amandaron from BSHM 3B. What is energy and how do physical and chemical changes affect it? Energy is the capacity to do work or transfer heat. Work is done when something is moved. The amount of work done is the product of the force applied to an object to move it a certain distance. Work equals force times distance. For example, it takes a certain amount of muscular force to lift this book from your desk to a certain height. We have a major types of energy. The moving energy, or what we call the kinetic energy, and stored energy, or what we called the potential energy. The first one is the kinetic energy, a moving matter. An object is the energy that it possesses due to its motion. It is defined as the work needed to accelerate a body of a given mass from the rest to its stated velocity. For examples are the wind, a moving mass of air, flowing water, and electricity, the flowing of electrons. Another form of kinetic energy is heat, the total kinetic energy of all moving atoms, ions, or molecules within a given substance. When two objects at different temperatures contact one another, heat flows from the warmer object to the cooler object. You learned this the first time you touch an object such as a hot stove. And yet, another kind of kinetic energy called electromagnetic radiation. Energy travels in the form of a wave as a result of changes in electrical and magnetic fields. There are many different forms of electromagnetic radiation. Take a look at the figure, each having a different wavelength, distance between successive peaks or through in the wave, and energy content. Forms of electromagnetic radiation with short wavelengths such as gamma rays, X-rays, and ultraviolet or UV radiation have a higher energy on a content than do forms with longer wavelengths such as visible light and infrared radiation. The second major type of energy is potential energy, which is stored and potentially available for use, something capable of becoming active. For example, like dynamite or a battery. Other examples include a rock held in your hand, the chemical energy stored in gasoline molecules, and the nuclear energy stored in the nuclei of atoms. Potential energy can be changed to kinetic energy. Examples: when you hold this book at a certain height, it has a potential energy. Drop it in your foot and its potential energy changes to kinetic energy. Other example: when a car engine burns gasoline, the potential energy stored in the chemical bonds of gasoline molecules changes into kinetic energy which propels the car and heat that flows into the environment. Potential energy stored as chemical energy in the molecules of the carbohydrates you eat becomes a kinetic energy when your body uses it to move and do other forms of work. Some types of energy are more useful than others. Energy quality is a measure of an energy source's capacity to do useful work. Highly quality energy is concentrated and has a high capacity to do useful work. Examples are very high temperature heat, nuclear fission, concentrated sunlight, high velocity, wind, and energy released by burning natural gas, gasoline, or coal. By contrast, low quality energy is dispersed and has a little capacity to do useful work. An example is heat dispersed in the moving molecules of a large amount of matter, such as the atmosphere or an ocean, so that its temperature is low. Energy changes are governed by two scientific laws. Thermodynamics is the study of energy transformations. Scientists have observed energy being changed from one form to another in millions of physical and chemical changes, but they have never been able to detect the creation or destruction of any energy in such changes. The result of these experiments have been summarized in the first law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of conservative of energy. Whenever energy is converted from one form to another in a physical or chemical change, no energy is created or destroyed. This scientific law tells us that no matter how hard we try or how clever we are, we cannot get more energy out of a physical or chemical change than we put in because energy input always equals energy output. This is one of the nature's basic rules that we cannot never violate. Because the first law of thermodynamics states that the energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted from one form to another, you may be tempted to think there will always be enough energy. Yet, if you fill a car's tank with a gasoline and drive around or use a flashlight battery until it is dead, something has been lost. What is it? The answer is, of course, the energy quality, the amount of energy available that can perform useful work. Countless experiments have shown that whenever energy is converted from one form to another, we always end up with a lower quality or less usable energy than we started with. This is a statement of the second law of thermodynamics. This lower quality energy usually takes the form of heat given off of a low temperature to the environment. There it is dispersed by the random motion of air or water molecules and becomes even less useful as a resource. In other words, when energy is changed from one form to another, it always goes from a more useful to a less useful form. No one has ever witnessed a violation of this fundamental scientific law. Consider these three examples of the second law of thermodynamics in action. The first one, when we drive a car, only about 13% of the high-quality energy available in its gasoline fuel actually moves the car. The remaining 87% is degraded to low-quality heat that is released into the environment. Thus, 87% of the money we spend for gasoline is not used to take us anywhere. The second one, when electrical energy in the form of moving electrons flows through filament wires in an incandescent light bulb, about 5% of it is changed into useful light, and 95% flows into the environment as low quality heat. In other words, the incandescent light bulb is really an energy wasting heat bulb. The third one, the last one. In living systems, solar energy is converted into chemical energy or food molecules and then into mechanical energy through moving, thinking, and living. During each conversion, high quality energy is degraded and flows into the environment as low quality heat. Energy efficiency is a measure of how much useful work is accomplished by a particular input of energy into a system. There is plenty of room for improving energy efficiency. Scientists estimate that only 16% of the energy used in the United States ends up performing useful work. The remaining 84% is either unavoidably wasted because of the second law of thermodynamics, 41%, or unnecessarily wasted, 43%. Thus, thermodynamics teaches us an important lesson. The cheapest and quickest way to get more energy is to stop wasting almost half the energy we use. Three scientific laws govern what we can and cannot do with matter and energy. The following highly reliable scientific laws of matter and energy are the three big ideas of this chapter. The first one, there is no way. According to the law of conservation of matter, no atoms are created or destroyed whenever matter undergoes a physical or chemical change. Thus, we cannot do away with chemicals. We can only change them from one physical state or a chemical form to another. The second one, you cannot get something for nothing. According to the first law of thermodynamics, a law of conservative of energy, no energy is created or destroyed whenever energy undergoes a physical or chemical change. This means that in such changes, we cannot get more energy out than we put in. The last one, you cannot break even. According to the second law of thermodynamics, whenever energy is converted from one form to another in a physical or chemical change, we always end up lower quality or less usable energy than we started with. No matter how clever we are, how hard we try, we cannot violate these three basic scientific laws or rules of nature. The second law of thermodynamics holds, I think, the supreme position among laws of nature. If your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. Arthur S. Eddington. That's all. Thank you.